Well, hello, Master Debaters and those watching the Masters debating. I am Jim Majors. This is my mustache, and this is Modern Day Debate. And tonight we have got a fresh debate topic. The question being posited tonight is, should missionaries be banned from indigenous peoples? And taking the affirmative, we have Mr. Bear. He's the bear. And then we have Ross, not Mr. Burns, who is taking the negation in this argument. You gentlemen want to introduce yourself?
Ross, you go for it. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. My name's Ross Burns. I host the Burns Eye View YouTube channel where I just take a Christian biblical perspective on issues of Western culture and try and interact with especially secularism from a biblical perspective. You can find me at Twitter and Facebook at Burns Eye View.
Excellent. Mr. Bear?
Sure. I'm on YouTube as well at Mr. Bear Atheist. I make content that addresses ideology and religion and tries to introduce some rationality and discourse into that with a bit of humour and a bit of a slight slant with that, with references to pop culture and all sorts of things. You can find me on Twitter as well at Mr. Bear Atheist.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. And you guys already know praise. If you have questions for our debaters, we will have a 30-minute or longer, kind of depending on what time we have at the very end for a Q&A. So go ahead and get those in. If you would, tag me in it at Jim Majors or however you do the YouTube thing. The format tonight is going to be 10-minute openings from both gentlemen and then 5-minute rebuttals from each, and then a 30-minute open discussion followed by that Q&A. So if the gentleman taking the affirmative, Mr. Bear, would like to start, I will start your time as soon as you start talking.
Sure. Thanks very much. And thanks for very much for having me on here. It's an honour. So I'd like to preface my opening. This is included in my opening, just to say that I do have a certain bias in this argument. As of the 19th of January this year, Western Australian Aboriginal elders asked State Discrimination Watchdog, the State Discrimination Watchdog, permission to ban visiting Christian missionaries to their area. They have received repeated harassment from Kingdom Aviation Ministries and Chariots of Fire Ministries. The watchdog confirmed to the Aboriginal communities that they should be able to say who comes onto their land. That's just a quick preface there, but I will start now with an opening question. And that question is, what's the reaction from ordinary everyday people when you mention the words Christian missionary? Do you receive universal praise and breathless exhortations about the harmonious and world-changing work Christian missionaries have done over the last 6 centuries in successfully bringing the word of the Abrahamic God to those parts of the world that had never heard of Jesus, resulting in the Christian world we see today? No, of course not, because missionaries across many denominations have been responsible for the eradication of various cultures, the spreading of disease, and the resultant deaths of potentially millions of people, the judgment of other cultures, imposing imperialism onto other cultures, relentless bullying, harassment, taking work away from local tradespeople, perpetuating racist political policies, skewing the view of sexuality into a negative, and ultimately failing to gather any ground with many cultures throughout history. Many may be aware that Indigenous contact with Europeans began in 1492 and has taken a massive toll. British colonists came to Australia and the Indigenous people were not only dispossessed of their land, they were hunted and killed without mercy. It's a dark spot in history, and the British declared Australia as being devoid of any humans. Now, the Protestants at the time and Christian churches were very slow to try to protect and to evangelise Indigenous people. When they did undertake any missionary work, they were faced with the twin dilemma, and that is that, as they do with other cultures, try to introduce Western cultural norms together with the gospel, with limited success. In John Harris's book, One Blood, he explores the theology that informed the early missionaries' efforts to proselytise Australia's Indigenous inhabitants. He notes that in most cases, the missionaries themselves were not equal to the task, with the better educated missionary candidates usually sent to such places as China or India, where it was anticipated that they would be competent to debate Buddhist or Hindu philosophies. The standard for Africa and Australia and the South Pacific was much lower. The early missionary theology was not only inadequate, but deeply flawed, particularly their belief that Indigenous Australians were the cursed descendants of Noah's son, Ham. This apparent curse was seen to apply to Ham and all his descendants, the biblical figure, including Ethiopians, Egyptians, Libyans, which by extension was given universal application to the Indigenous people of Australia. But I know what you're thinking. This is all in the past. This is during a time when life was tough. People held various uneducated beliefs and attitudes, and now that we are more aware of the damage, the various organisations who take part in these expeditions must surely be limiting their contact with various peoples. Unfortunately, in March this year, it was reported evangelical missionary group Ethnos 360 openly fundraised to buy a helicopter to target tribes in Brazil. Now, key Indigenous organisations and leaders in Brazil have angrily denounced the move, particularly during the worldwide pandemic. Ethnos 360 has been responsible for so-called manhunts, in quotes, in Paraguay in the 1970s and 80s, in which uncontacted Ayareo people were captured and dragged out of the forest. Several people were killed. Many others died of disease. Therefore, due to the inherent and observed failure of the conversion of many cultures over the preceding 6 centuries, and as it can be seen to be dangerous and oppressive for governments to resist the conversion of vulnerable groups on their behalf, I propose that the relevant Australian bodies, including ANTAR, which is an independent non-government organisation and is non-party political, with their purpose to engage, educate and mobilise a broad community movement to advocate for justice, rights and respect for Australia's First Peoples, to be enabled to enlist a ban against missionaries on a case-by-case basis from interacting with isolated tribes for anthropological, physical, health reasons, both physical and psychological. Now, the government of any nation cannot both advocate for the perpetuity of Indigenous culture and ignore the elders when their spirituality is at stake. In closing, I think I'm almost done, aren't I? What I do propose in the place of proselytising is helping cultures via secular humanist means, as witnessed throughout history via interrelations with traders, explorers, miners, settlers, facilitating education and industrialisation with the benefits of progressive modernisation. The singular and most important challenge to 21st century missionaries and those who are considering missionary work isn't learning a new language and customs and attempting to translate the Bible in order to preach the gospel to those who have never been exposed to it. No, it is this. The singular most important challenge to these people is the ability to seriously contemplate with a high level of self-introspection their rationalisation for their justification, for potentially threatening the health of this and future generations, threatening the culture of this and future generations, and threatening the interrelations of Indigenous people with the introduction of poisonous concepts such as sin and sexual morality. Saying God instructed me is unverifiable, completely and utterly unjustified. And that's it.
Jim, you're on mute.
Of course I'm muted. I would be muted. Okay, you had about 2 minutes left, but we're going to go ahead and apply that to the Q&A session.
Sure.
Ross, not Mr. Burns, are you ready to give your argument?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, great. I'll give you a 2-minute warning, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks. Okay. Excellent. All right, yeah, great. So I likewise Mr. Bear pointed out that he does have bias in the situation, and so do I. I come from a particular worldview. I'm a Christian and an obnoxious Christian too, a Calvinist and a postmillennialist, and so that kind of gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. I believe that salvation is faith alone in Christ alone, and also given that all human beings are under God's wrath and condemnation for their sin, and they need to repent and believe in the sin-bearing sacrifice of Jesus Christ to be spared from hell and to enjoy eternal happiness. That's just cards on the table. That's where I'm coming from. And the Lord Jesus at the end of Matthew's gospel has charged all of his followers to fulfill the Great Commission to make disciples of all the nations of the earth and to teach them everything, to baptize them. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'm under order from the New Testament and the Christian scriptures to do what I can to spread the gospel, to disciple the nations, all the people groups. So that's the first thing. That's just where I'm coming from. I'm a Reformed Christian. And then I'm going to mention three other points here. Three other points to demonstrate why I think a ban on evangelism to Indigenous peoples is a bad idea. And here's the first thing. So to ban evangelism on Indigenous peoples is to infringe upon the inalienable rights of free speech and religion. So just to clarify, just to make a qualification, I'm not defending in any way harassment or trespassing or vandalism or any kind of forced entry into someone's home. A good example I might use is if tomorrow morning two well-dressed Jesuit missionaries knock on my door and they say, "Hey, can we talk to you about the wonders of the Roman Catholic Church?" I'm going to respond, "No, sorry, this is a bad time. Haven't you heard there's a pandemic going on? And I'm busy. Sorry, come back another time." Or, Zoom. Zoom is always an option. And if they were to barge through my front door and set up shop in my kitchen, I'm going to call the cops, right? So I am not defending that kind of evangelism at all. With that being said, human beings do not have a right intrinsically of freedom from annoyance or perceived rudeness. While we do have freedoms of speech and religion inalienably, we don't have a right of freedom from annoyance or perceived rudeness. And liberals used to understand this. It used to be the slogan of the moderate left, which I respected very much, that I disagree with what you're saying. In fact, I may even hate what you're saying, but I would fight for your right to say it. Right? And that's what used to be the slogan of the moderate left, but I fear that it is no longer that way. And I would fight for the right of those Jesuits or a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness to preach their perspective and to try and convert people from their perspective. I would fight for their right to say it, even though I disagree with it very strongly. So the first point, a ban on evangelism infringes upon the inalienable rights of human beings of speech and religion. Now, the second thing I'm going to bring up is that a ban on evangelism in the name of cultural preservation is philosophically inconsistent. And the reason why is there are two assumptions in such a ban in the name of cultural preservation. One is that all cultures are equal. And the second one is that no one should influence cultural change on another culture. Those two assumptions. So I'm going to address the first one. So that all cultures are equal. I don't think this is true, and I also think you think that isn't true. So the American Sociological Association defines culture in this way, and I think this is a good definition that we can grab a hold of. A culture is the languages, customs, beliefs, rules, arts, knowledge, and collective identities and memories developed by members of all social groups that make their social environments meaningful. That's what a culture is. So it's not just the rituals and the arts, but it's also the values and the worldview of a group of people. So let's take three cultures for our example. So we could take a tribalism, a culture of traditional religion, of tribalism, right? Exactly what you're picturing. So their values include, they're informed by tradition, and it's a very superstitious culture. Animism is a big belief. So that's one culture we have, with a few highlights. Another culture we could point to is a Western, materialistic, individualistic, secular, humanist culture, which prizes things like the scientific method or feminism. And then a last culture we might consider is a fundamentalist Christian culture of the Bible Belt in America, which has things like legalism, an anti-intellectualism bent, King James only, young earth creation, right? All that stuff is wrapped up into fundamentalist Christian culture. Now, all three of those cultures, I would say none of us would say that all three of them are equal, right? That they are all equally valuable. Some of them believe things that are true, some of them don't. Some of them are better for human flourishing, and some of them are not. And moreover, if we are to say that all culturally held beliefs are equal, that in itself is a culturally held belief, that all cultures are equal. So does it follow then that the culturally held belief that all cultures are equal is just as good as the culturally held belief that not all cultures are equal? It can't be, right? You have to say, if you're going to say all cultures are equal, you have to say that that culturally held belief is better than other cultures. It's just philosophically necessary. And now the second assumption, that no one should change culture, no one should seek to change culture, I also think is philosophically inconsistent. So you're saying that no one should try to convince an animist from Kenya that his ancestor spirits are not guiding him in his agricultural decisions. Okay. No one should try to convince an atheist YouTuber that naturalism is untrue. Okay. Then the third thing we could say is no one should try to convince an evangelical Christian that they ought not evangelize the indigenous, because that's part of their culture. It's a major part of Christian culture. So a ban on evangelism in the name of preventing cultural change changes culture. It has to.
You got a 2-minute warning.
Thank you. And what does Mr. Bear's YouTube channel exist for except to change culture, which I fully support him in doing. And if he was undergoing a potential ban for his YouTube channel, I would be on his side fighting for him to be able to keep doing what he's doing. And furthermore, Christian missionaries, the modern evangelical Christianary movement, is not interested in destroying culture, but transforming culture. And then my last point, I'm going to help illustrate that a little bit. So my favorite example of successful missionary endeavor is the Sawi people of Western New Guinea. The Sawi people were a headhunting, cannibalistic culture. Their prized virtues included being deceitful and treacherous to one's enemy. They actually thought that Judas was the hero from the Gospels that should be emulated. They were in constant war with the sub-factions around them. They were riddled with malaria and hepatitis C. They had a high infant mortality rate. And the Richardson family, a missionary family from Canada, came to live with them. They translated the Bible for them. They built them a makeshift hospital, and they did so much good for them. They were able to convert virtually all of the Sawi people to Christianity. The Sawi people found out that they were Indonesian citizens, and many work for the government today, and they're a thriving people group. But their culture has not been destroyed. It has been transformed. They're not Western capitalist Republicans. They're still the Sawi people with their own cultural things, but they are now Christian. So those are the reasons why I think a ban on evangelism is a bad idea.
Okay, fantastic. Get about 30 seconds left, so we're going to add that little chunk to the Q&A as well. Every little bit counts, especially when you've got Stephen Steen in the live chat. Now we're going to enter a 5-minute rebuttal from both the gentlemen. First, Mr. Bear, and then Ross, not Mr. Burns. You cannot interrupt each other unless the other person says something about your mother. So, Mr. Bear, I will start whenever you begin.
Okay, great. Okay. There were some interesting points raised there, very interesting points about the infringement on free speech. Part of my opening was in relation to not so much the infringement on free speech, but managing these cases, these incidents on a case-by-case basis, perhaps by an independent body. Of course, everyone has the right to free speech. However, there was an interesting part that you mentioned there, that as part of the Christian culture, the part of the Christian culture was that they can influence other cultures. We have to explore that, because the reason and justification for that part of Christian culture has to be something that is a lot more tangible than we're instructed to, or we're being ordered to. That is based on unverifiable evidence and information, which is the Bible and scriptures and so on. That's questionable. So that order to change other cultures because it's part of the Christian culture is extremely debatable and very highly topical, which is what we're talking about here, obviously. Just the second point there that you mentioned was the Sawi people. I would posit that their conversion was more to do with, you mentioned Don Richardson, the missionary. He was an excellent linguist. His linguistic skills were brilliant. And obviously he and his wife, I believe it was Carol was her name, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were they were people, they were very good with people and very affable. I would posit that his linguistic skills and ability to crack the Sawi people's language and able to communicate with them was probably more of the reason for the success of him getting through to them. As you mentioned, whenever he opened his mouth to preach the Bible, he was received with boredom, disinterest at best. The Sawi people couldn't relate to anything about the Bible. Until Richardson noticed that as part of a peaceful ritual between tribes, they were warring at the time, and he observed that the leader of one village gave his child to the leader of the other village, who in turn gave his child to the other leader. It was called the peace child. Richardson jumped on this and appropriated that as a redemptive analogy to show that this could be adapted to the gospel. So I would say that it was a bit of luck, his skills, that eventually and finally convinced the Sawi people into Christianity.
2-minute warning.
He won it up go. And I feel that was more the success of the Sawi people, because there were many tribes around the Sawi people that weren't the way they were at that time as well. They had very high linguistic skills and and communicated with excellent language skills. It just so happened that the Sawi were within their own domain. So I would posit that in that regard. But like I say, the justification to change other cultures, it's almost like an order as part of the Christian theology is probably somewhat unfounded. And the justification, I'll quote Bertrand Russell: righteousness cannot be born until self-righteousness is dead. So that level of self-righteousness needs to dissipate, and righteousness can be achieved via other means. Secular humanist means by empathy, understanding, and perhaps not risking the lives of these isolated peoples, and respecting their culture for perpetuity and for anthropological reasons. Respect needs to be met both ways.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and end it there, and we're going to switch over to a rebuttal from Ross, not Mr. Burns. Thank you for keeping it clean and above the belt, Mr. Bear. That does not mean that you have to do the same, Ross. I will start your 5 minutes whenever you begin.
Excellent. Well, I also appreciate a very respectful, focus on the issues debate too, and I expect exactly that from Bear. So that is fantastic. So just to address a couple of things, what I can do with 5 minutes. Mr. Bear brought up a lot of good stuff. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, which is probably on everybody's mind, is, hey, Ross, don't you realize that we're under like a pandemic right now? And I totally recognize that we're under a pandemic right now. The risk of transmitting a, uncurable, non-vaccinated viral infection like COVID-19 to indigenous peoples is not anything that is a responsible human being should do. So I fully support a waiting for any missionary organization to not go right now. Wait until there's a vaccine available and all that sort of stuff. But in general, I think there's an idea that when Western missionaries go over to indigenous cultures, they're just going to get them sick with a lot of diseases that they don't have access to treat. Well, they already have lots of diseases. They already have malaria. They already have high infant mortality rates. And keeping Western medicine from them isn't going to help them. And if we're going to say that Western missionaries going to indigenous tribes is bad for their health, well, wouldn't that be the same thing for all Westerners? Don't we all carry the same diseases that we could potentially harm people? So I don't know why we would say some Westerners should be allowed to go, but not others. Either we should say none or all. Seems to me what should be. Another thing would be, Mr. Bear brought up a lot of abuses by Christian missionaries in the past, and I can tell you probably more than you know right now. There have been terrible things Christian missionaries have done to indigenous peoples. They've abused them. They've completely, the fact that there are Presbyterians in Ghana, for example, is taking Scottish culture and transporting it right into Ghana. And the same with South Korea, actually. There are more Presbyterians in South Korea than Scotland, which is just amazing. So I would, with Mr. Bear, condemn all of the mistakes and the irresponsibilities from missionaries in the past. However, that doesn't represent any major modern missionary organization that's around today, which is a statement that I'd more or less be willing to defend. And if we're going to say that some actions by people in the past within this kind of nonprofit organization, some of them were bad, therefore we should get rid of this kind of nonprofit organization. What should we say about, thank you, what should we say about educational scholarships? Like, obviously there have been abuses in the past where people have taken advantage of the scholarship program and kind of charity. People have certainly taken advantage of that in the past. Therefore, we should ban all of them right now, right? That would be the logic, I think. Or we could say that we should learn from the past mistakes. We should learn from the bad things that charities and missionaries have done in the past and not make those same mistakes again. One other thing I'd like to try and address is the idea that we should preserve the culture, that we should preserve the culture, that harming indigenous cultures is bad. And I guess my question for Mr. Bear respectfully would be, according to what objective standard of morality is changing a culture bad? Or is it just your personal preference that harming a culture, changing a culture is a bad thing? I would just like to see some kind of objective standard that we could use to say what certain actions with cultures are bad and certain are not.
27 3/4 seconds.
Thank you. And the other thing was, I don't know if I can fit this in, Christian culture was said to not have sufficient grounds, right? Bible verses and things like that. It sounds like what we're really saying is that secular humanism should be the deciding culture to determine whether an organization should be allowed to preach their message.
Okay, fantastic. I really appreciate you gentlemen staying within your time limits. We will now move into the 30-minute open discussion. Again, if you have a question for these debaters, drop it in the side chat, tag @ModernDayDebate or @Jim Majors. Now, this is going to start off with Mr. Bear, and it's just going to go from there. So take the gloves off. Let's bring out the Jell-O and get this thing started.
Okay. Okay, it was very, very interesting points yet again. Look, to say I have a real big issue with when you were saying missionaries that go in and introduce diseases to isolated people. When you said, well, they have diseases already, it's somewhat disingenuous because we're talking about diseases as we see right now is a great example of that. I know you're not condoning so much missionary work presently because of this the coronavirus situation. It's really no different to what has happened before, though. And just to say that these people had Hep C or Hep B, we'll go in anyway, and we'll introduce perhaps something worse than that, but that's okay because they've already got diseases. It's a strange dichotomy to sort of take that leap and say, well, we'll introduce HIV. That's okay because they've got Hep C. It's not the way to argue that point at all. It's really quite disingenuous to go that way. Secondly, an interesting. I'm just going back a little bit in terms of. I'll let you respond if you like. Sorry, yeah, I'm going ahead of myself.
Yeah, sorry. I should clarify. So I didn't. It's the way you phrase. I'm like, yeah, I guess it did kind of sound that way. I mean, they already have malaria, so let's pile on everything else. That's not very kind of me.
If I took it that way, that's probably my perception. But
yeah, let me clarify
that a little bit more. Yeah.
No, so what I meant was, I think it's, and I don't think it's what you were implying, but sometimes we have the idea in our head that the indigenous man or woman is in pristine health, unaffected by the outside world, but actually they're already suffering from diseases that we can cure and prevent. So rather than keep all Western contact away, we should go in with our medicine so we can help them with things like malaria and things like Hep C and Hep B from easily curable and treatable infections that we can help them with. Yeah. So
thanks for clarifying. I see where you're coming from a bit better now. Yeah. Okay. It's still an incredible risk to introduce something quite serious to an isolated tribe, such as, like I say, for example, HIV, the coronavirus, etc. They could pretty much decimate isolated tribes of, say, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. It's not a justification. It's still not a justification to say, hey, they've got Hep C. We'll go in there. We'll cure them. Damn, now we've introduced this to them. I still don't think it's quite justified that way. The risk is still far too serious to do that. It's not a consideration of empathy. It's not a serious consideration. It's, I'm doing this because I have a right to do it, regardless of the consequences. It's not on.
So are you willing then to ban all Western contact to Indigenous peoples?
I would propose that on a case-by-case basis. Yes.
What would be the if you don't know, that's okay, but what would be the qualifications to allow a group to go into an Indigenous culture to try and help them or impact them in some way?
It really depends on the situation. If we're talking about things like we've mentioned the Sawi people, who were amongst their own tribal group. Look, it's one of those things that's highly subjective to the case at hand. We've seen missionaries go into Kenya and wipe out livestock. That was the livelihood of those people. We've seen missionaries go into India to influence Indians on the side of the British for political reasons. I'm sort of going into other avenues to make the point. There are motivations that missionaries undertake, even covert missionaries that say, look, we're here to teach. However, they're influencing people via disingenuous methods, they're covert missionaries, and it's one of those things where it's a case-by-case basis. I think if there are people being wiped out because of disease, go in via secular humanist means by people who are qualified to do as such, not missionaries that we all assume have the same qualifications, the same knowledge, the same theological basis, and the same empathy, the same the same human interrelationship skills that the people in the past may have had. We sort of assume that every missionary is the same. They're all really good people. They're very highly educated. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. They know everything. They know medical situations, and they don't. They don't have medical qualifications. Many don't have that, and some are just completely risking these tribes. I say go in there via experts in that field. If it's medically related, send in medical experts, not missionaries.
Yeah, I mean, I assume you're aware that missionary organizations like Ethnos 360 or the Southern Baptist Missionary Group, the International Mission Board as well, they send over doctors and nurses and people who can help them with their raising livestock. So it's not just, a guy, a gal, and a couple Bibles who go over it. It's with the bigger missionary organizations, it's a very complete effort with the experts and the funding that I think you would really appreciate. I would agree.
I acknowledge that, of course. The problem as well is that we have around 1.5 million US short-term missionary people going to places that really aren't qualified to be doing so. And that's an alarming number of people going into places where they shouldn't really be going. A lot of youthful, idealistic, probably misplaced idealism with youthful people going into places saying, hey, I'm going to make a difference. I'll teach them Jesus, we'll do activities. And unfortunately, these things is really just to tick a box of Western people saying, I've done my job good, I can go back home now. It's the numbers that are involved, especially with short term. I'm glad you brought in the long term. I do acknowledge that there are some good aspects of that in terms of medical aid, and with in Honduras there was a lot of rebuilding there by missionary work. So I do acknowledge that. However, even then they were spending way too much money and taking work away from local tradespeople in terms of building houses. They built houses for $30,000. They really should have only cost $3,000. They're spending up to $2 billion in these expeditions, short-term expeditions. It's a waste of money. It's impacting fiscal situations for these people, especially in Honduras. That happened. It's one of those misplaced idealism is the best way to phrase it, if I can put it that way.
I mean, I completely, what you just said about short-term missionaries or short-term missionary efforts are a wreck. I would completely agree with you. A group of 15 to 20 very enthusiastic American or Canadian missionaries who fly over into a place in Brazil or in Africa, and they serve them for 2 weeks. They help them. They give them lots of medicine, lots of resources, give them everything they can, just very well-meaning people. And they leave, and they just leave a terrible vacuum.
So let's ban that for starters.
Well, I'm still uncomfortable with a ban, but I would share in your disapproval for that kind of thing. Now, short-term missionaries, short-term mission efforts done well are helpful if they aid something already, if they aid long-term missions, long-term missionaries, for example, someone who's already established in the area. They can come in and help build houses. They can do lots of good things. But the kind of short-term missions efforts that we're both talking about, I completely agree, are bad. Now, I don't know if trusting some kind of international government regulatory agency with giving check marks to certain groups and not others, that seems to me like a situation rife for abuse. I mean,
on that topic, then, if we agree that it's bad, what's the objective standard for that determination? Because I'm sort of putting that back on you. I know you asked me that. I will address it, but I'm putting that back on yourself. You've mentioned, short-term missionaries are bad. You mentioned objective standard. So what's the objective standard for that?
Well, from my perspective, I would point to scriptures as an objective standard of morality. Jesus' command to love your neighbor as yourself would be a pretty good one. Doing more harm than good, it would be, from the Christian perspective, doing more harm than good for a short-term mission group of 20 people to go into rural Kenya and just completely disrupt everything and be out of there in 2 weeks with no real commitment to them. So I would say that the objective standard from the scriptures would easily refute that.
Is loving your neighbour objective, though? Is that an objective phrase?
Yeah, love your neighbor as yourself.
That's subjective, though, isn't it?
Loving
subjective. Love is subjective, right?
No, I don't think love. Love is, well, we might get into some hairy semantics here, but
we have to, because we're talking about objective standards, so we need to.
Yeah.
If we're going to define objectivism in relation to love, it needs to be verified.
So we probably have very different ideas of love. Love to me is not, the biblical understanding of love is not like a feeling or a desire. It's a verb, it's an action, it's something you do for another person for their increased well-being. And the Greek has 4 different words for love: phileo, eros, stergo, and agape. And the word used in the New Testament to describe that kind of love is agape. And in the Old Testament, it's hesed, which is just this a very righteous, not selfish, I want what's best for you. And
cool.
Right.
Yep.
So that kind of action and desire is an objective moral standard from
it is. I understand. Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Cool.
Thanks for clarifying. That's good. Did you want to raise something as well? I'm sort of attacking you. Come at me.
Well, I don't mind. We're having a very good conversation.
Can I go back to the issue of...
trying to say something, but...
sure.
I was muted again. Just give you gentlemen an idea of where we are. We have 18 minutes left, so we're about halfway through.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Great.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I can do math. What?
This is very good math. I'm impressed. Yeah, great. Yeah, I would love to ask you a couple questions. Do you think that Western materialistic, the name list can get long, but secular humanism as a culture is superior to all other cultures?
I see secular humanism as not something that is perhaps the best, I suppose, worldview, if you want to phrase it, if I can phrase it that way. I don't suppose it's the best view, no, but I can advocate for its positive outcomes in terms of separating religious connotations, religious weight and ideology away from simply interacting with other people via the basics of human emotions, as in empathy and based on the situations, consideration and care and so on. We can act that way without any ideology baggage behind it. So no, it's perhaps not the best way, but it's a very positive way in terms of engaging with others by secular humanism. So I would vouch for it that way.
Okay. So are you detaching things like empathy and consideration from others from culture?
From culture. Culture, you defined culture very well before in terms of, if I go back in time, when you mentioned identities and meaningful values within culture. Is that what you were mentioning before in the opening? I think you mentioned that as point 3. Culture is...
Repeat the definition from the American Sociological Association?
I think it was that at that time, yes. I made some quick notes. Was it cultural identity and meaningful values was mentioned there, I think, as well.
I can just repeat. So
Yep.
the ASA defines culture as the languages, customs, beliefs, rules, arts, knowledge, and collective identities and memories developed by members of all social groups that make their social environments meaningful.
I think in order to have any of those things, there has to be some form of empathy, consideration, and humanist emotion to form those things, obviously, because the cultural identity, especially of the Indigenous people, is very much connected to the land. So that they are very connected to the land and ancestors, and that's an element of, I suppose, love for the land and love for their ancestors, which is a part of the human condition. So I would say that yes, those attributes, very human attributes, form a part of culture. Of course they do. Yeah.
I mean, would you agree? In my study, certainly not at the graduate level. My study of cultures, particularly the traditional religious cultures, the animist kind of cultures, as you see in Africa, selfishness is not seen as a negative thing. It's very difficult to explain to a traditional religionist that thinking about others ahead of yourself is, or rather, thinking about yourself regardless of others' interests is sinful from a Christian perspective. That's very odd for them. So empathy would actually not come very easily to the minority world, or the majority world. We live in the minority world.
Yeah, but that's everybody. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but you and I.
It's everybody. It's not just tribes. It's not just tribes. We're all tribal in our way. Even as advanced as we think we are extremely still very tribal. We still are very in our cliques and in our groups. And Christians have proven to be very selfish as well. It's not a them or us type thing saying, well, they're very selfish, they don't have Christian morals. We know of evangelists, we know of the money making fake pastors out there who are doing this for no other reason than selfishness. I'll put it another way. In terms of the African evangelists that were employed by various missions, they were notorious radicals. They did not hesitate to scandalise village opinion by destroying ancestor shrines, breaking ceremonial pots and disrupting communal rituals, insulting and disobeying heathen elders. They aggressively advertised and displayed material advantages of mission membership. It was just one of those things that these so-called moral missionaries were displaying horrendous behaviours towards these so-called heathens and tribes. It happened here in Australia as well. People would, the missionaries would, I'm talking about the past again, I know, but I'm just making that as a parallel argument in terms of selfishness. Aboriginals would look at the colonial people and say, well, is God judging them for their actions as well? It was rather an ironic situation where missionaries were preaching moral values to Aboriginals, and the Aboriginals would see the behaviours of the missionaries and so put it back on them. So it's not a thing to say, it's not an us or them thing. It's that's everybody. That's the human condition. We can be very selfish.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with you. No, I didn't mean to paint the picture that Christians were default and unselfish, moral. No, we are definitely all by nature selfish. I completely agree with you. My only point was to bring up that us as Western people, we view selfishness as a problem. We view that as a problem. In African tribal traditional religionists would not view that as a problem. Culturally, it would be a weird thing for you to be grounded for being selfish or to be disciplined for being selfish. It would be a very weird thing. But for us, we recognize the selfishness in ourselves and in our culture as a bad thing. They don't. That would be the difference culturally.
I suppose it depends on the context of what do you mean by being selfish in relation to tribal people. What would be an example of selfishness? Because we could probably, there's been many times when Westerners have gone in and said to it was the South American tribe, the what were they called, the Piraha people, South America. Yeah. You've probably heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they laughed at everything. If their house blew away in a storm, they laughed. And so Westerners looked at this and said, gee, what oafs are these people? They're lazy. They laugh at everything. That's what I mean. In the context, it's like, why should a Westerner look at an isolated Indigenous peoples and pass judgment on them and say, well, look, they're being selfish? How do we judge the selfishness? It's a tricky and very nuanced situation because, like I say, the Pirara people used to laugh at things. They used to laugh when they lost all their food, and the missionaries would say, "You've lost all your food. What are you going to eat? Why are you laughing at this?" They would laugh when people would fall over and injure themselves. It's a thing of getting by. It was their way of dealing with stress, as we do now. We watch comedy movies during a pandemic because we're trying to get over that stress of what's going on. So it's how you see the world, right? It's your paradigm. Some will say that's selfish. Others will say, well, that's survival. It's like a criminal stealing food to feed their kid. Oh, that's being selfish. Others would see it as, no, they're helping someone. It's a very tricky paradigm to balance.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I completely agree with you. You can misjudge someone as being selfish sometimes. I completely agree. If I can go out on a limb here and put forth an illustration, say, for example, oh God, it's going to be so stereotypical, but just to say in Africa.
I'm not going to judge you.
Oh man, like the thing that came to my head, I'm like, oh God, you really going to say that out loud? But yes, I am. So an African tribesman has a goat, and the goat has the goats have litters, or I don't know, a goat litter, and there's tons of goats, and they look at people around them, strangers who maybe they don't know, who are very hungry, right? They don't have goats, and now they have an abundance. Should they give? They have more goats than they need. Should they give? And I'm sorry if you're vegan. Should they give some of their goats to the strangers? Now, the African traditional religionists would say, well, of course not. And we would say, well, of course you should, right? You have more than you need. Of course you should. And the cultural difference would be stark there. The African traditional religionists would not see that as a bad thing, and we would see that as perhaps a callous thing.
Yep. Okay. In that context, there's obviously a reason why they wouldn't share. Based on their belief. So what's the underlying reason for that? Do you know? Would you know? Or is it simply an analogy?
Yeah, it was just an illustration.
Yeah, it's one of those things like I can draw a parallel from that to I suppose there is a parallel here of that, and that is that there's in terms of I don't know if I should go there or not. Okay, I'll go there. It's one of those things that in some religious ideologies, okay, there's reasons why things are looked down on over others. And I don't mean to say this in an offensive way, but with female menstruation, with Indigenous cultures, this is considered sacred to Australian cultures because it distinguishes the time when a female is capable of bringing life into the world. It's something that's celebrated.
Period.
You don't see that. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, did I say period?
I'm glad you went there. That's something that's seen as being celebrated, okay? And in religious ideologies, in some religious, for example, in Islam, I know that's drawing another bow, but in Islam, it's seen as something that's not celebrated. It's something that's seen, even in Christianity, in some denominations, this is seen as something that is unclean, okay? Because it is a part of Scripture. So there must be a part of their belief that they won't share the goats. It's either because they consider the goats to be sacred, as Indians do with cows. They'll see cows as being sacred because it's part of that ideology that they carry. So there must be something special, something that we would deem to be wrong or objectively wrong or subjectively wrong, whichever way you want to go, we as Westerners would say, you should share what's going on here. But if they can justify it by an ideology or belief, like you say, you would fight for that ideology and that belief. You'd fight for their freedom of having that belief, yeah?
We have 5 minutes left, gentlemen.
Oh, thank you. Certainly not to the extent of harming another person. You have the right to do with your own body what you want until you strike another person in the face, right? So you have the right to practice your religion unless your religion involves human sacrifice or abusing people or something like that, right? So I would agree with you that, assuming you believe the same, that freedom of religion does not cover awful things.
True. Like, again, it depends on the situation and what's happening and how it's justified. Yeah, look, exactly right. It's an interesting one you put up there. I suppose it comes down to, again, what you mentioned at the start was whose values are best. And if the Calvinist values are better, why are they better? And because we know with Calvinism, people are predestined to receive God. Is that right?
Oh boy, you really want to open up this can of worms with 4 minutes left? We can go there, but no.
I know it's complicated. We don't have to. We can save that for another time if you like.
Brave man.
Yeah.
So if they are predestined, then the whole issue with missionary work is moot, and that supports the ban. That's all I was going to say.
That could be an important thing. That wouldn't be too difficult. So God ordains, as a Calvinist, God ordains the ends, which is salvation, but he also ordains the means, which would be the traveling of the missionary to the place and the preaching of the gospel. So no Calvinist believes that a person is converted apart from hearing the gospel. No person is regenerate apart from that. So
is it a part of predestination, though?
What, that who will and who won't believe?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Well,
so regardless of preaching the gospel, it doesn't matter.
Right, but God will bless. For instance, maybe by an example, if I was preaching on Sunday morning, which probably won't be, if I was preaching on Sunday morning to a crowd of people I don't know, and none of them had heard the gospel before, and I explained it very clearly that all of you are under God's just condemnation, but if you repent and believe in Jesus' sin-bearing sacrifice, you'll experience everlasting happiness, the imputation of Christ's righteousness, all the full 9 yards of, what I like to say. Some people will believe, some people won't. The people who will believe, in other words, the people who will believe only will believe because God has enabled them to do so. If God had remained passive and done nothing, they would not have believed. Though it is an act of obedience on my part to do the preaching of the gospel. I don't have the power to convince someone to become a Christian. And that's something that's outside of my control. But it is part of my obedience to go and to do that. Now, certainly recognizing that it's not me who changes someone's heart. Maybe I can get out here.
There's a lot of stuff in there, probably for another time. But that was very, very interesting.
We got 2 minutes. Let's see what last minute wisdom we can pack in here.
Can I just put forward a very quick scenario, if I'm allowed to?
Sure.
Let's turn the tables and say an elder visits a Catholic church and talks with the bishop, builds rapport, talks to the bishop, and then turns around and says, look, there's something missing from your life. This is something that missionaries enact when they're converting, right? They say there's something missing from your life. What if the elder says the rainbow serpent is missing from your life? Now, the church has every right to say no, as you say. They can say no, thank you, let's walk away. But how many times do you feel the Indigenous elder has the right to proselytize to the bishop? Is it 2, 3, 4 times? And what if the socioeconomics were reversed? How would the bishop feel then? Would the bishop feel provoked into adapting a new belief? Would they be threatened in some way? Would they, what if the elder was the race that colonized the bishop's race? Would that make it more acceptable or less acceptable? It's one of those scenarios that if you flip the scenario very simply, you see that the elder really shouldn't be doing what you get the point. It's basically flipping the scenario.
Yeah. So just to respond to that, I would absolutely say that the elder has the right to approach the Catholic bishop as often as he wants, as long as he is not, as long as he's not harassing him or damaging his property or threatening him or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, I have had friends personally for years and years and years who I talked to on a weekly basis and tried to convince them to become a Christian, right? And we're still friends. So there is a way to
Is that harassment?
Try to evangelize someone without being threatening or a jerk or, there are ways to go about this.
You could probably say that as being harassment, though, couldn't you?
Well,
it's kind of like having a friend that's vegan.
Yeah, it's kind of like having a friend that's vegan.
Well, they can harass you equally. It's still harassment, right?
Well, I mean, it depends. Just like being annoying isn't harassment. Like there is a legally defined definition of what harassment is. I think we would all agree on, which I don't have written in front of me. But just being annoying and rude isn't harassment. It is something beyond that.
Okay. Do you gentlemen want to make your closing statements? Just your little your elevator speech to convince the audience to hold your position.
Would you like to go first, Ross?
Well,
I'm happy to go.
You're the affirmative, so.
Yep, you went first, Mr. Bear. So we'll let Mr. Ross, not Mr. Burns. That's so damn confusing. To finish up.
Sorry. I'm finished. I'll close up. Yep.
Ross will. Right. You were the affirmative. You opened up. You rebutted first. You can kick that off.
By all means. Okay. I just want to sum up. A ban on missionaries. Like I say, look, this should be perhaps done on a case-by-case basis by independent non-government bodies. And instead, a delivery method that is non-judgmental, safe and administered by experts in the field is probably the better way to go in terms of if the gospel is, if someone wants to preach the gospel to a group, perhaps do it in line with an independent body or someone who is an expert in the field with medical people. I just want to say, look, this is probably the most fundamental aspect of this. If a person's identity has more to do with where they belong rather than what they believe or what they do, then switching affiliation to a new religion could be subversive, dangerous and destructive for the many reasons I've mentioned before. Health reasons, psychological reasons, the impact it may have on interrelations in terms of the concept of sin, sexuality, changing that paradigm to something that can be quite destructive. The potential there shouldn't be entertained. It should be dismissed altogether. Let's simply ban this sort of work and interact with these tribal groups via secular means, safe means, with the knowledge that we have of the history of what has happened in the past. Let's be smarter and let's just get rid of the ideology aspect and go with the secular humanist aspect. If part of that has to be a religion, sure, introduce it in a safe environment. If they say no, that's all there is to it. Let's maintain cultures and recognise them for the uniqueness for what they are and appreciate other cultures with respect, some humility, and without some self-righteousness. Thanks.
Oh. Yeah, okay, great. Closing. I've been in some tall buildings in my life, but I don't know how many floors that elevator had, but that was a great closing. And now we're going to let Ross, not Mr. Burns, give his quick closing in his Wonkavator. So go ahead and get after it.
All right, I'll try and keep it somewhat brief.
No, I'm here all night. I'm here for you guys.
All right, well, yeah, all right. Everybody relax, get some coffee. So I would just probably echo just a couple points. It sounds like Mr. Bear and I agree on a lot of things. We agree that there have been tremendous abuses by missionaries in the past and that they shouldn't happen in the future. We might disagree about government's place. I find it a little bit eerie and ominous that an independent government organization would be in charge of this. Kind of sounds like they're not, I mean, if they're unelected, it sounds a little sketchy that almost that they could be imposing secular humanism on everyone. I don't think secular humanism is a cultural ideology. I think it is part of Western culture, and I don't think it gets to be exempt from the maxim that no culturally held belief is better than another or should be impressed upon another. And with that, I would just say, Mr. Bear, thank you so much for a great debate and a great discussion. And Jim, thanks so much for hosting it as well. It's been a great time.
I echo that sentiment. Thank you very much for taking part in this. It took a while, but we got there, and I do appreciate it. It's always good to hear where others come from. So it's been fascinating on many levels.
Well, fascinating. I had a really great time. Thank both of you gentlemen. We're going to go ahead and get through the Q&A session. Going to do the super chats first from Step Hen Steen for $1.99. It says Jim's mustache converted to Christianity. Yeah, and it's a Calvinist, and it says you're going to hell. And Sunday Worship for $2 says Nathan Thompson uses Internet Explorer. That's probably true. Stupid Horror Energy for $5 says the thing about Missionary is that it is really easy for both of us to stimulate the clit. None of these are questions, people. This is just information. Caleb for $5 says, Bear, you're advocating for the infringement of speech. There's no way around that. So he's putting the gloves on. You stepping up. What's up, Bear?
Well, as I mentioned, it's not so much an impingement on free speech. It's really a case-by-case basis. We have to manage this through independent bodies that are non-government affiliated, and it's a matter of looking at this as non-bullying, non-harassment, and doing this in a smarter way. As I said in the closing, you probably posted that earlier in the chat, but as I said in closing, just to clarify, this needs to be done a lot smarter. If there is an imperative to introduce the gospel to people, do it via better means than fundraising a helicopter and flying into a Brazilian tribe during COVID-19 crisis. That's not the best way to do this.
Okay, next from Stupid Horror Energy for $5 says Jim's stash is too ticklish, so with him I prefer downward doggy. You're not, but that doesn't help you though. It just well, we can talk about that later. Let's see. Stupid Horror Energy for $5.
Oh dear.
It's relevant. Do you think missionary work, pause for effect, is a form of imperialism / white supremacy / colonization? So whoever wants to take that, or both of you.
I certainly think it can be that way. A missionary work in and of itself has nothing to do with that. I mean, my ancestors were in northwestern Europe were probably colonized by people who weren't very pale, as I am. I mean, the most influential Christian of all time outside of the Apostle Paul is St. Augustine, who was an African, who was probably a very dark-skinned man. So Christianity in and of itself is not a Anglo-Saxon religion. But it can be some in white supremacist ideology, which is antithetical to Christianity and stupid. In white supremacist ideology, some of Christianity can be borrowed, and that kind of that can become some kind of package deal that could certainly and has certainly in the past been the kind of imperialism that you're talking about. But major missionary organizations today, like Ethnos 360 or IMB or World Harvest or any of those kinds of things, have nothing whatsoever to do with white supremacy or imperialism, and they think those guys are just as much douchebags as I do.
Okay.
I actually agree. I actually agree with Ross. There, at a time, it was predominantly white imperialism at a certain time in history, but now there's a broad mix of missionary people from all sorts of races. So yeah, I agree there.
Right. I mean, you can't colonize and not expect a little infiltration going on. You know, it's sorry, we're going to diversify now. You got greedy. From S.J. Thomason for $5 says, Bear, do you recognize the Christian contributions to the world in universities, hospitals, and women's rights?
Of course I do. Just as much as I recognise atheist contributions in hospitals and schools and contributions to society. It's not really a direct reference to say that Christianity shaped the Western world and benefited the Western world. We're talking about Enlightenment and various aspects there, Greek philosophy and Eastern philosophies that have infiltrated across the world, that have contributed to the world apart from other means. And as I say, in histories, there were secular means that contributed to the world via traders, explorers and miners and settlers that had no religious affiliation, and they helped with post-modernisation. So yeah, I mean, I recognise it, of course I do, but I also recognise the secular progressions as well.
It's a fantastic answer. From Brian Stevens, says, at Modern Day Debate, he's not here, I'm Jim. Question says, with the current COVID-19 situation, is stopping large church gatherings an infringement on religious freedoms? Do you believe churches should not be meeting in person?
I'm assuming that one's directed at me.
Yeah, well, I think that really can go to both of you, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely. I'm very much on the side of the government does not have the ability, or the authority or the right to suspend things like rights of assembly or freedom of religion or things like that, just because the government deems that a situation is enough of an emergency. In other words, if our rights are inalienable, except when the government determines that the situation is really, is really critical, I think it's just giving that power to the government to, from an American perspective, to circumvent the Bill of Rights when it's convenient to do so, or when it's expedient to do so, is a dangerous power in the hands of the government. That being said, I would certainly recommend that pastors of large churches don't. I mean, we can do Zoom calls, right? We can do this online. We don't.
Not if you're Pentecostal.
In person. Yeah. So I mean, I think, though I would not support a governmental ban on such a thing, I would think it wise not to.
You ever try to get the Holy Ghost through a webcam? It's hard, brother.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you that.
From Hunter Rothman says, at Jim Majors, that's me, at Modern Day Debate, he's not here, to Mr. Bear, and didn't say shit about Ross, says, if there wasn't a risk of giving a disease to the people, would I still be wrong? I think it's Mr. Bear. Maybe they're just trying to get my attention.
I'm not sure how that's. I'm not sure how to respond to that. It's a strange phrasing.
Right. Let me see if I can reword it. I know what they're trying to say. So if it wasn't contracted, like able to be contracted, I guess, would it still be wrong? Like if it wasn't contagious, or if you weren't, if you were.
Yes, it would still be wrong for psychological reasons. And changing, like I say, changing the paradigm of people's interrelationships. So if you're introducing concepts such as sin and depravity and sexual morality in that way, in what is right and wrong, then you are impacting that culture potentially for future generations in a negative aspect. So despite the health reasons and risks, I would say that is still a dangerous thing to introduce to other cultures.
Okay. And do you want to add anything to that, Ross? Or
yeah, I guess would it cause psychological distress to to a child, tell them that a theme park can be a dangerous place, for example. It probably would, to be like, hey, stay close to your parents. You never know. There are bad people out here. It may cause psychological distress to that young child, but if it's true, it's worth saying. And in the same way, someone might become distressed when they're told that they are offending God's law, or that they are in action or behavior that they're engaging in is sinful. But if it's true, it does need to be said. Just because something causes someone psychological distress. I know I, many times in my life, have been confronted by people who love me about things that I was engaging in I shouldn't have been, but it still needed to be said. It would be my only response to Mr. Bear's thoughts.
You jumped across a couple of things there, because you're talking about truth. Now, truth is a very important thing to analyze, because when we're saying truth and God, those two aren't necessarily equal, because there's nothing that verifies a God or any gods. There's nothing that proves a God or any gods. Therefore, there's no truth to it. It can be a statement of belief, a truth statement of belief, coming from belief that, yes, I believe in a God. That's a truth statement of belief, okay? It's a differentiation to say, if you go to a theme park, you could get hurt. That's true. If you are gay and you marry someone who is also gay, you are going to hell. That's not true. There's no truth based to that. It's a belief, a truth based on belief. Okay, so we have to draw that distinction there. There is truth, and there's also a statement of truth belief, if you know what I mean, if I'm phrasing that the right way. Mm-hmm. We have to be careful between establishing what truth is. And if we're establishing the truth of hell, that will continually psychologically disturb the interrelations of tribal people for this generation and future generations. It's harmful, and it shouldn't happen.
Just to pitch in my 2 cents on that, because that just really kind of sparked something. I think there's something to be said. So, for example, in my sophomore, my junior, and the first part of my senior year, a good friend in the group of people that I hung out with and grew up with went through chemotherapy and radiation and to fight cancer, and eventually went into remission and everything like that. But of course, going through all the therapies and different radiation treatments and such, he lost all of his hair. And so we all buzzed our hair, and we didn't, like, when it started to get a little long, we buzzed it again. We kept it buzzed for two years out of our high school, and there's like four of us. I think that there's something to be said for the unity in something that, even if it doesn't affect you, it's like marching in a gay pride march, or white people marching with Martin Luther King. It's just a show of support, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You got another super chat, Jim.
Oh, right on. Did you send it to me?
I'll do it right now.
Oh, okay. No, is it Sigifredo Sarabia?
Tioga.
Oh, well, I have one from Sigifredo Sarabia, so I'm going to do that one, and then I'll do the other one.
All right.
It says, at Bear, a side religion is supplying benefits like vaccines wrong. And at Burns, do you have to accept the religion to have benefits in relation? Is that wrong? Good luck. So Bear, is supplying benefits like vaccines wrong?
Of course it's not wrong, no. And supplying vaccines can be done via other organisations, secular organisations, that anyone can deliver vaccines, and I advocate for that. Of course I do, especially when isolated peoples are at risk of being eradicated. Of course, there's a responsibility for those who can do it, should do it. But what we're talking about here is proselytizing to tribes about an ideology that can impact them in other ways apart from their health. But of course, their health, of course, is imperative.
I I just want to answer this. It is wrong if by vaccines you mean smallpox blankets.
Yeah, that's bad. That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, so I think the question was, do you have to include the religious message in order to give someone a vaccine? Certainly not. No, I think I would actually look at it the other way around. If you as a Western missionary with just so much wealth and prosperity that we have, go over to a suffering people group with lots of money raised that you've raised over the United States, and you don't help them with their health, I would just question that. Like if you have the ability to help them with their with vaccination, with medical treatment, then I think you should definitely do it. So I think the two go hand in hand. You can certainly do vaccines without Christianity, and you can certainly do Christianity without vaccines. But I think I would prefer a combined package. I think that's the best of both worlds.
Okay. And the second part to that question, Burns, I believe it's saying in order to receive the benefits from from Christianity or from religion, do you have to accept the religion? And is it wrong if you receive benefits without accepting the religion?
Oh, like a vaccination or something like that? No, I think. If there are strings attached, I would like if you're only giving out a Hep C treatment with the promise that they'll come to mass the next week. That's a little sketchy. I mean, for the major missionary organizations, it's a both and thing. We want you to become Christians, but we also want to help you. Like we also want your well-being to improve. It's a both and.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of attest to that. I had my own experience with missionary work. I particularly remember in Guatemala, we were building bottle schools and a bottle clinic, like out of glass bottles and trash and Adobe. And it was a really great experience. But what bothered me even then as a Christian was that they were obviously hungry. We had food, we had bottles upon bottles upon bottles upon cases of pallets of drinking water, first aid kits, like antibiotics and things like that. But it was almost as if they had to go through a sermon before they could, they didn't have to, but they were definitely put in a position where they were obligated to.
Mm.
I didn't mean to end the debate on a downer. Are there any other questions in the live chat? Let's see. Oh, let's see. Question for Burns, for Burnseye. Burnseye? Oh, that's you. Okay, Burnseye. If we do allow Christian missionaries to go to indigenous tribes, how would you deal with them, or how would you deal with conflicting denominations and explaining to them? Oh, it scrolled down. Stop typing, people. No, that's a different question. Dang, there's more questions. Hang on, people. Stay with me. Let's see. Okay. How should missionaries be monitored to make sure they don't... Nope, damn it. Oh, my gosh. Okay, bird's eye view. At what age does it... Mother... Yeah, this is good. In case anybody's wondering what I'm smoking. Okay, question for Burns Eye. If we do allow Christian missionaries to go to indigenous tribes, how would you deal with conflicting denominations and explaining to them which ones are right? So are you going to come at them with the KJV or what?
Oh, I would, as a good Protestant, a good Reformed Christian, I would just point them to the scriptures, give them the ability to read for themselves and sort out these issues for themselves. Now, I mean, one very easy thing would be the epistemological source of each Christian denomination. The ones who say sola scriptura, that we base our beliefs off the Bible primarily and only, right? And plain reason. Those Christian denominations are going to agree with each other on 95% of issues. When you work in other organizations like Roman Catholicism or Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, which accept things outside of the Bible, whether it's tradition or living prophets or things like that, then you end up with a whole myriad of weird beliefs and traditions. And so we would simply point, as a Protestant evangelical missionary, we would just point them to the scriptures and say, make your own mind up, and warn them of groups that have these outside filters through which you're supposed to read the scriptures, whether it be tradition or a prophet living in Salt Lake City.
Okay, I thought you were going to take a little bit longer because I was looking for that question.
Stretch it out.
Yeah. So bird's eye view. Again, at what age? Oh, this is from Kilo Doggy 1. You can take that how you want. At what age does it make sense to label a human being's behavior as sinful? Are newborn babies capable of sin on their first day of life? So are we sprinkling to save from hell, or is there an age of accountability?
Oh, well, I guess I didn't differentiate myself enough. Reformed, Calvinist, postmillennialist, and a Baptist. So I'm not a...
Full submersion, gotcha.
Full submersion sort of guy.
You take the dive.
Right,
no,
right.
But I would certainly recognize that if you're talking about like an age of accountability thing or something, I can't help you there. I'm sorry. The biblical scriptures don't talk about an age of accountability. So I am principled. I hold to a principled ambiguity on that issue. So I don't know about age of accountability, though I do know that children, though they may not have the mental faculties to be able to decide right from wrong in every situation, they, no one has to teach a child to say no when you tell them to do something. That's just something that they, at least from a Christian perspective, they already come with. Like they come with a selfish nature. They come with things that need to be not encouraged, but discouraged lovingly by parents. So yes, even children have sinful natures. The only issue is they're not strong enough or smart enough or coherent enough to act upon them yet.
Okay. And if anybody's getting baptized at a Baptist church anytime soon, plug your nose literally with your hand. These guys don't joke around. Let's see.
That's right. Put your goggles on.
From Hunter Rothman says to Burns, how should missionaries be monitored to make sure they don't infringe on the people's rights, and who should monitor them? So they have an escort or a government, should it be regulated?
Oh gosh, I would be very, very wary of any sort of regulatory agencies who are saying that this missionary group can do this and this missionary group can't do that. I wouldn't want that power in any government official's hands. I would just say that the same kind of law enforcement agencies that we have would be good. I mean, if a missionary breaks into an indigenous person's hut and steals some stuff from them, that's a crime. They've infringed upon their rights to their property and things like that, or to harm them in any way. So in a situation in which there are no, which I think is probably what the question is getting at, in a situation in which there are no, blue and red and white flashing lights with cars, who are going to come in and save the day, I would look towards watchdog organizations to come and save the day, to do investigation, let the free market of ideas, as it were. If Ethnos 360, for example, was to have a missionary in Brazil who went in and got everybody sick with coronavirus, the Brazilian government can take care of that, right? They can take care of that negligence and irresponsibility, and all of the donors of Ethnos 360 can take care of that as well. They're going to say, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to hold these people accountable and responsible, fire them, get rid of them for what for their negligence? So
I would take a drive into the jungle.
Oh yeah, you take them out into the jungle. Let the orangutans after them. I have no idea if there are orangutans in Brazil, but Yeah.
Can I add to that as well when you're done?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor. I would like to hear what you say.
There's also something very important here, another aspect, and that is the aspect of power and perceived power. So in terms of the Western Australian elders, they are the minority. They're very much the minority in a country where they are still not legally recognised as the owners of this land. So we're talking about rich Western missionaries imposing themselves on a minority population who had were pushed to see the watchdog of Western Australia, the state. So we're talking about an element of power here that is also a very important driving force here in terms of, to use a Bible analogy, a David and Goliath situation. That's an important element here.
Okay, we have some more super chats that have come in. One that I missed. It was actually the question that I was going to ask if nobody did. From Stupid Horror Energy for $5 says, do you think it's wrong to preach abstinence rather than condom use in an area ravaged by STDs and AIDS especially? So,
Yeah.
so probably like particularly referencing like the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an anti contraception kind of Christian. I think oh man, I'm glad the filter caught that. Oh good, oh thank goodness. Oh my. Okay, so moving on from what the filter just caught. No, I would definitely say that both would be good. Abstinence and contraception. I don't buy into the whole they're going to do it anyway, so just give them some rubber sort of thing. But make both available. Make the benefits of abstinence known and available, and saving sex for marriage between one man and one woman, I think is a wonderful thing. It's been a tremendous blessing in my own life. I know that, and it's commanded in the scriptures. But also make available contraception, I think, is a good thing. I don't think it's an either or situation there.
Unfortunately, the Pope thinks otherwise, and that's what makes this very dangerous.
Yeah, we had a reformation about that guy. Yeah,
But he's still around, and he's still influencing people.
Yeah, he's still got the same hat too. It's a bummer, man.
He needs to get rid of that too.
Okay, we have a super chat from Ashley Gouch. I hope I'm saying that right. Says Burns, define selfish, then please explain which African tribes you've encountered and how they define and promote it. I take issue with the statement you made earlier regarding indigenous people. So you are not getting out of this unscathed, mister.
Oh yeah, I knew. I was like, the filter was arguing with me. I was like, nah, just go with it. But no, I certainly don't consider that all indigenous people or all African people are selfish or anything like that. I'm just saying and I myself have not been to Africa. It's only what I've read in anthropological books or sociological books, the difference in culture.
I got all mine from watching Cool Runnings.
There you go. I don't know. So I had a private one, but I can't remember the name. But
great movie.
Yeah, it is a great movie. None of the people in that movie are Jamaican, but it's still.
It's Hollywood.
Yeah, I understand. That was a terrific movie. But no. So my definition of selfish would be when you have the opportunity to bless, that's a Christian word, to improve the well-being of another person or of yourself, you choose yourself, right? That would be a rough definition of selfish. And in our culture, that's seen as a bad thing. I mean, just the offense that the questioner took at what I said is proof enough of that. And in other cultures, it's not so. It's not seen as a bad thing. It's a barrier that Christian missionaries have when explaining. We just assume that this is taken for granted, that everybody agrees that selfishness is bad, but it's not. It's not a bad thing.
Okay, we have another super chat for $5 from Caleb. It says, Bear, so is it wrong to share your belief on sexuality to a culture that has sex with 10-year-olds as a rite of passage?
Okay.
So So it's like an ethics kind of morality thing. Should you impose your standard of what is right on theirs?
Well, this comes back to what we were saying earlier in terms of allowing people the right to believe what they do. But in terms of that sort of action, I condemn that sort of action as well. That happens without religious ideology. So that sort of thing, I mean, you can't go to someone who's doing that and say, well, guess what? Homosexuality is wrong. So what you're doing is wrong, but I also think homosexuality is wrong. An abomination, in fact, because my God says that. That's kind of having your cake and eat it too, because you're imposing an equally horrible morality onto another horrible morality. If they're insulting people because of their religious ideology, I'm totally against it. Any negative action by religious ideology needs to stop. It's not justified. However, like I say, if you're introducing something just as bad, an idea that's just as bad, or a concept that's just as bad, or some sort of condemnation or judgment on something that is perceived to be just as bad, then they're equally as bad as one another.
Okay, and we have a super chat for $2 from Suj Thomason. It says, Bear, are you an Aborigine or of European descent? And of course, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
He's a bear.
Well,
but is he an Aborigine bear or a European bear?
Oh, I stand corrected.
I am of European descent. Correct.
I knew it. I've never seen no Aborigine bear.
No, I haven't seen any yet. It doesn't mean they don't exist. But yeah, I am of European descent. I'm not sure what the correlation is, but I do recognise that my ancestors brought their faith with them to this country, to a country that had their elders had no Catholicism. So we brought that with us, and it's a factor that I have to recognise that my family brought that with us, and that's where this comes from. I'm not sure if that is interrelated, but or the means behind the question, but I do admit that. Yeah.
I can only assume that I haven't gotten the same question because I already said I was of northwestern European descent. I assume I would have gotten the same question too.
Possibly, yeah. It's very possible. I'm going to please just keep your mouth shut, Jim. Don't say nothing. Just next question. I can do this. Come on, scroll faster. We're in trouble. Let's see. Okay, from Fredo Sarabia, and somebody please tell me if I'm saying that right, preferably Siji, for $2 that says, at Bear, can you name secular missionaries in one hand? Doctors Without Borders.
Yes, the Red Cross, I believe. There's probably quite a few others that a simple Google search would reveal to you. I don't know them off by heart, no, but I believe the Red Cross is, and they do amazing work. I think it's Oxfam, perhaps.
Yes, and Doctors Without Borders as well.
Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam, Red Cross. Well, there's three. Can I go to Google?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I mean, in fact, most of the big ones, that you would normally think of and think that they were religious, actually are not.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, they appear to be, but they're not. It's quite interesting. So there are plenty out there. To say they're not is just not searching properly on Google.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot to say for a humanitarian effort that can have vaccines in one hand and food in the other, and not have to worry about where we're going to put the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Audrey Hepburn was the ambassador for, back in the day, UNICEF perhaps, was it? UNICEF. I'm not sure.
That sounds right.
Yeah, something like that. She was the ambassador for that. Yeah. So yeah, there's plenty out there.
Well, awesome. I don't see any more questions, and it's been over an hour and a half, so I'm going to go ahead and shut this down because I'm the host and I can do that kind of shit. But it's been a great pleasure. You guys go ahead and plug yourselves real quick, and I will shut us down. Mr. Bear, where are you? What do people type to find you?
Sure.
And all the other good stuff. Are your DMs open?
Okay, sure. Yeah, just find me on YouTube at Mr. Bear Atheist. If you type in Mr. Bear, other things pop up. So just try Mr. Bear Atheist. I'm on Twitter, at Mr. Bear Atheist, and I do some religious response videos with a bit of comedy in them.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, and for me as well, just type in YouTube Burns Eye View. That's my channel. I just, like I said before, I try to interact with Western secularism from a biblical perspective. The channel is mostly geared towards non-Christians, but I like to think I have a following in both. At least my comment section is certainly blown up by the non-Christian, which I really enjoy. I love interacting with you. So if you are a non-Christian and you like arguing with Christians, I'm your guy.
And I've got to say, Ross, you've been very open to discourse, which I appreciate as well. I do appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, Mr. Bear.
Yeah,
and thank you to everybody in the live chat for watching. Like and share this out. I'm Jim Majors. I have a YouTube that you can't see. Maybe you can. It's youtube.com/Jim Majors, and my mustache